With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Yutes. We left off on Daf Yutches Amid Beis by the Mishnah. The Mishnah is going to continue to describe more details about the preparation that the Kohen Gadol underwent Erev Yom Kippur. We're going to be focusing specifically on the avodah of the chafina, which means that when the Kohen Gadol entered the Kodesh HaKodshim, when he came there to offer the ketores, so he would have to walk in there. In one hand, he would be holding a shovel full of coals. In another hand, he'll be holding a ladle or a ladle filled with the exact amount of ketores that's needed to fill up both of his cupped hands. But when he walks into the Kodesh HaKodshim, both of his hands are occupied. Shovel, the ladle. When he gets in there, he puts the shovel of coals on the ground. And then he's going to have to get all of the ketores from the ladle into his cupped hands. Now think about how exactly does he do it. In other words, if the ketores would only fill up one hand, so then one hand holds the ladle, you pour it into the other. Being that he needed to hold both of his cupped hands needed to be filled with the ketores. So this is, as the Gemara is going to describe a few daf ahead, this is from the hardest avodas in the Beis HaMikdash. Either he would have to put then the ladle of the ketores in his mouth and with his teeth manipulate it and turn it upside down, flip it into his cupped hands, or he would hold the ladle not by its handle, but by its actual cup. With his thumbs, he would somehow lift it up and it would be flipped over from his thumbs into his hands. And the key is he was not allowed to lose one iota of ketores. None of it was allowed to fall on the ground. And that was a specific avodah that he had to train for the whole 7 days. And on top of that, there was a religious issue. That during the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, where the Tzedukim began to interpret the Torah, rejecting the oral Torah, the way they decided to interpret it, they understood, obviously erroneously, that the ketores already has to be smoking, the coals have to be smoking prior to the entry of the Kodesh HaKodshim. So when he walks in there, ki be'anan eira, he should appear, the Kohen Gadol, already with the cloud. And that's obviously not the case. So not only did he need to train to do it properly, but it was here that we would adjure him, we would make him swear that he would follow the steps of the avodah, the way Hashem said it to Moshe and Sinai, and not, God forbid, the way the Tzedukim said it. We're going to be learning on the Amud Aleph, on Yutes Amud Aleph, many more Mishnayos and from Midrash that are going to be describing the layout of the Beis HaMikdash. Because this training that we just spoke about, specifically about the chafina, happened in the chamber that was called the Aftinas chamber. And those of us who learn Shkalim remember that one of the 13 offices that we had in the Beis HaMikdash was the Aftinas family, because they were in charge of making the ketores. So there was a chamber that was named after them, but it became, so to say, the place where the Kohen Gadol trained during the 7 days of Prisha. In other words, the Kohen Gadol really had two chambers that were, so to say, his to use during these 7 days. One is what we learned about on Daf Beis, which is the Parhedrin chamber, Lishkas Parhedrin. The other one is the Lishkas Beis Haftinas. And what the Gemara is going to clarify successfully is to know which one was on the north side of the Azara and which one was in the south side of the Azara. We will also be addressing a very general question regarding how do we view the Kohanim. Are the Kohanim Shluchei Derachmana? Are they representing Hashem, the merciful one? Or do we view Kohanim as being representatives, Shluchim, of us? And we will see how from a certain lashon that's used in the Mishnah, it seems that we're going to have a challenge with those who hold that Kohanim Ashluchei Derachmana. And we're going to get off track a little bit, Kederach of the Gemara. We're going to go off on a tangent. We're going to be speaking about a topic that we learned about in Masechta Brachos, and that is whether a person is even allowed to make a hand motion, a hand gesture, while they're saying the Shema. And there it says absolutely not. Right, by Shemona Esrei we know it's something that Chassidus always brings down, that man da machve kame malke, or man da machve b'mogchoig, Kame Malka, whoever makes even a hand motion while they're standing Shemona Esrei, if you're standing in front of a king, even if a fly lands on your face, even to motion it off is considered disrespectful. We'll see whether one can make such a motion during the Shema or not. And we're going to have some interesting statements. And Agadah, for example, Rava says that Hasach Sichas Chulin, if a person even has a idle conversation, is over ba'asei. then there'll be Oiver Balav. One should only speak about words of Torah. We're going to learn about that. And if we'll have time, we'll begin on Daf Yutes Amid Beis, right, with the new Mishnah, continuing to speak then about the avodah of the Kohen Gadol, or the occupation of the Kohen Gadol the night of Yom Kippur. The night of Yom Kippur, there's no real avodah, but again, we made sure that he stayed awake because of to prevent him, perhaps if he'll sleep, you might have a seminal emission, what they did to him, what he learned, and a lot more. Let us start on Daf Yud Ches Amid Beis again by the Mishnah, right? Masru Ziknei Beis. Baruch atah Adino Eloheinu melech haolam shachar kol nivudvari. So based on the Mishnah on Daf Yud Ches Amid Aleph, that from the Sanhedrin they appointed, the Mishnah said Zikenim, which means at least 2 elders that would review with him, that would teach him, that would help him remember during all of the Shivas Yemei Perisha, all of the dinim, all of the steps of the Avodah. So when they finished, so he now continues the Mishnah, Masru Ziknei Beis Din Ziknei Kahuna. So he was given over, so to say, to the elders of the Kaihanim. Now, the He'elu Beis Haftinas, the Ziknei Kahuna were not here to teach him halachos. That comes from the Sanhedrin. The Ziknei Kahuna were the ones that were experts in the application, in the actual Maisa of the Avodah. And again, we're going to focus, as we spoke on in the intro, about the Chafina, which was actually very difficult. Difficult doesn't mean muscle difficult, it means technique difficult. It's something that you have to train, you have to repeat. Okay, and Hishbiyu, and they would also adjure him, as we'll see in a moment. It wasn't about make sure you do the best you could. No, the oath was make sure you don't follow, God forbid, the way that Tzedukim would come into the Kodesh HaKodshim already with the Ketayra slit, and that's, God forbid, not the way we should do it. And then V'niftru v'holchu lahem, and then they went. Now, exactly who made him take this oath that the Mishnah now will spell out, that's subject to a debate, whether it's connected to the Ziknei Beis Din, which also would make sense because it is the Sanhedrin, as the Rambam writes, the Sanhedrin are the oral Torah. And the oath was he should not follow the Tzedukim. Whether it was the Ziknei Kahuna. Be that as it may, this is the specific oath that they made him take. For Amru Loi, Ishi, my master. They spoke to him with respect. Ishi Kohen Gadol, my master the Kohen Gadol. I want you to know that Anu Shluchei Beis Din. And you, Va'ata, you are Shlucheinu Vishliach Beis Din. You're both our Shluchim and the Shliach of the Beis Din. And again, you'll hear, as we spoke on in the intro, this already appears that Kohanim are Shluchei Didan. And that will be a challenge on those who hold that Kohanim are viewed as Shluchim of God Almighty. But this is what they tell them. Mashbi'in anu alech, we adjure you. By the one whose name, the Hashem's name is revealed, the Shekhinah is revealed in this house. Shaloi tishane davar mikol masho marnu lecha. Don't deviate the Seder from as we taught you. And again, we are speaking specifically about making sure that when he enters the Kodesh Kodshim, the Ketayris is not yet on fire. It's not yet put on the coals. He enters with a shovel full of coals in one hand, with the ladle of the Ketayris in the other hand, and he only puts the Ketayris after he gets them in his cupped hands on the coals while he is already inside the Kodesh HaKodshim. But after they make him swear, basically they're telling him that we suspected that you might be a Tzeduki. So who Peirishu Baicha? Right? He cries, as the Gemara will explain furthermore, for him being suspected. And they also cry, because indeed you're not supposed to suspect an innocent person, but this is part of the procedure. Now, next step, we did not want for him to fall asleep Yom Kippur at night. So it's amazing how this Mishnah transitions between Shivas Yemei Perisha to the night of Yom Kippur. So im hu chacham, if he is able to teach, so then doirish. So we tell for him to teach the entire. And the easiest way to stay up Shavuos night is by teaching. The ones who listen have a much harder time. So if he's able to teach, so he teaches, then he'll stay awake. V'im lav, and if he's unable to teach himself, still some people cannot teach, but they can listen. So then talmidei chachamim dorshim lafanav. Whether it's one, most times you have to have many people, but what do they darshan for him? Rashi says they darshan halachis. They darshan parts of Torah that only a scholar can understand. And what happens if he's not even able to listen a whole night to shiurim and halacha or shiurim and gemara? So then, next step, im ragol likrois, if he knows how to read, then they tell him to read Tanach. Koira kriya means reading Tanach or learning Tanach, just to appreciate that then they didn't have chumashim. The Tanach was, let's say, unvowelized. Doesn't have the nekudos. Not everyone was proficient in the vowels of Tanach. So that's also a madrega. So if he knows how to read, they told him to read. Ve'im lav koidem lefanov. And ubameh koidem lefanov, that means if he's on the lowest level of scholarship, so then, some people, they have to learn topics that chap their attention. If not, they're going to space out. So the Mishnah says, this is what we teach him. Iyuf, Ezra, Divrei Hayomim. And there's a lot spoken about what's unique about these three Sfarim. Don't forget, Iyuv is a very philosophical sefer. Right, Rashi says all three of them are Moshe Chasalev. They draw you in. So here you have philosophical questions is, how can good people suffer? That's a topic that until today you speak about it. Everyone gets in there. Freedom of choice, divine providence. How do you explain? Then you have stories. What happened in the past? Ezra built a base. Stories, people. Then you have history. Divrei Hayomim. Whatever, inyanim that are unique, that are Moshe Chasalev, to guarantee that the Kohen Gadol will stay awake and will listen to the class. So you shouldn't fall asleep. And if you fall asleep, you might have a re'iyas keri. However, Zechariah ben Kevutal says that no, we don't. It doesn't have to be either Iyuv, Ezra, or Divrei Hayomim. He says, there were many times, Korisi Lofanov, I read in front of the Kohen Gadol, and as we already spoke out, that Bezman Bayesheni, the Kohen Gadol was not necessarily the most worthy one, or he was, in most cases, Dafka not the most worthy one, including the fact that he was not learned. I read for him Daniel, many people say it's not Dafka Daniel. All he meant was, don't give me Iyuv, Ezra, Divrei Hayomim. It can be any part of Tanach, as long as we are engaging with him to help him stay awake. Daf Yutes. So from here until the bottom of the Amid, the Gemara is going to try to determine, now that he used this Lishkas Beis Aftinas, as the Mishnah says, Vehelu Beis Aftinas, and as we learned in Daf Beis that he had the Lishkas Parhedrin, we simply want to know which one was in the north, which one was in the south. Okay, and when you care about the Beis HaMikdash, it's a big question. So it's very important to know exactly where it was. So Tani, we learned. First, why did he go into the Aftinas chamber? What was unique about them? We learned them in Shkolim. They were the families that knew, right, that Mal Oshan, remember that? And they never shared the secret. So they learned Ilalamdai Chafina, which is technically very difficult, as we spoke in the intro. Amar Rav Papa says, Rav Papa, now that we are up to Yoma Daf Yutes, so we learned the Mishnah on Daf Beis, we learned the Mishnah over here. Comes out that he had two chambers that was almost his. Achas was called Lishkas Parhedrin. The other one was Lishkas Beis Aftinas. And basically, Lishkas Parhedrin was a living chambers. He Pashat lived there. There was a bed there. He slept there. The Aftinas chamber was where he practiced. One of them was in the north, one was in the south. How do we know that they were not on the same side? That we know. And now we're going to go through a whole series of Mishnayos and Midas. Clear. One north, one south. What's not clear is which one in the north, which one is in the south. Gavaldik. Now let's go. Achas b'tzafoin ditnan chavra Mishnayos Midas vav lishkos hoya bazara. There were 6 chambers on the ground level. That's very important to add. In the Azara. Now, by the way, not only were there many more if you count the second stories, but if you count that which was on the east, we'll see in the Mishnah now there were 2 more. If you are only looking on the northern and southern sides of the Azara on the ground level, there was a total of 6. And, Gimel B'Tzof and Gimel B'Dar. 3 in the north, 3 in the south. Sheh B'Darum. What was on the south? Let's go to the names. Lishkas HaMelach, chamber of salt. Lishkas HaParva, the Lishka of Parva. I know there's time, even though it looks like it's late. It's a very, very good, easy daf to learn relative to others. So I'm going to jump ahead quickly to Daf Lamed Hey. On Daf Lamed Hey, we have a Rashi Tosfos explaining why was that Lishka called Parva. So the Gemara says, you know what Parva means? I know today we say, Parav, Milchik Fleishik's Parva. Parva means, the Gemara says, Amgusha. Amgusha means a Machashiv. The Lishka of the black magicianer. And Rashi writes, Machashiv echad b'na'ah Ushmoy Parva. A Machashev built it, and his name was Parva, so they called it Parva. That's on Daf Lamed Hamad Aleph. So Tosfos says, he brings over there like this, that there was a when they built this lishka, this Parva, this Amgusha, this Machashev, he wanted to be able to see the Kohen Gadol doing the Avodah on Yom Kippur. Right, today you would put a webcam in there. But the way he did it then was he built a secretive tunnel underground, and he was hoping that when the Kohen Gadol goes in there, he'll be able to watch him. And they caught him. Where did they catch him building the tunnel underground? In this location. So they called this lishka, the place where we chapped the black magicianer. No, Tosfos is really trying to explain why would they call a lishka after a machasher? Why give him the covet? Because that was where we caught him. Then we're going to have other shittas that say, no, as we'll see in a moment, on top of this lishka there was a mikvah. Now in those days, plumbing was nothing like it was today. He wasn't a black magician, or many say. He was a fruma yid. He figured out how to build a plumbing system that the mikvah that was on top of this chamber, no one saw the pipes. So it looked like black magic. You went into the room, like today, and wow, there was running water. It looked like he made kishuv. Anyways, let's come back over here. The lishka was called the lishka of the parva, but it's good to know that parva meant a machashiv. Lishkas hamadichin, the rinsing chamber. Now, these are the three guys, let's halk up. These are the three that were in the south. Now the Mishnah continues to explain the function of each one. Lishkas ha-melech, meaning shesham hayu noisnim lelech lekarbon. Right, we need melech, that's where they stored the salt. Number two, Lishkas ha-parva, what was that chamber used for? Shesham hayu melchem oiris kachim. That is where they would begin the process of turning the hides into leather. Okay, by the first step is salting it. And va'al gaga. Hoysa Beisa Tefilla, on top of the roof, like we mentioned, of Beisa Parva, there was a mikvah. What was that mikvah used for? Chevra, Hoysa Batfilos L'Kohen Gadol B'Yom Kippurim. That was where the mikvah was, and we're going to come back to that in a moment. So now we know the mikvah was on the south side. Lishkas Hamadichin. Very good. Again, whoever's looking at the picture, just the south side on the picture will be in the bottom. Lishkas Hamadichin, Shom Hayamadichin. There's where they rinsed Kirvei kachim, the innards have to be washed out. Now, many of the innards were put on the mizbeach, but it's obviously extremely disrespectful to give something to God before it's rinsed out, especially the intestines. And there he writes, the way you would get to the mikvah that was on top of the Beis HaParva was actually from this lishka, from the lishka samadichin. Umisham mesiba oil legag Beis HaParva. There was a mesiba. Mesiba means a circular staircase that would take you to the roof, to the Beis HaParva, and you went to the roof because the mikvah that the Kohen Gadol used was on that roof. Weiter. Getting water high up on the roof, everything is a chachma. The source of some waters that were used for these mikvahs came from a place that was physically even higher than this mikvah. And that's how it works. So since the water, even though the water goes down, and then it went back up, but it had the koyach to go back up because it was not being pumped to higher than its source. Today you have machines, there were no machinery then, but there was a lot of chachma that went into it. Weiter. The three that were in the north, Gimel Shabbat Sofin, they're called Lishkas Eitz, the chamber of wood. Number two, Lishkas HaGoyla, the diaspora Lishka, Gavaldik. They gave cover to the Yidden from that lived outside Eretz Yisrael because they were the ones that either there was a well there, they built a well, they gave some cover to the Yidden that live in the diaspora. And the third one was Lishkas HaGazis, the chamber of the cut stone. Lishkaso Eitz, guys, the last narrow line. I forgot what it was used for. Guys, mamish like we just had on Daf Tezayin. Same thing. That was the raya that we brought over there. There we were speaking about another halacha, but it's the same concept. If the author of Mishnah and Midrash would not have been Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, if it would be any other author, then why would Rabbeinu Kadosh quote a Tana to say, he said he doesn't know, so don't quote him. It's the charaya that he's saying the whole thing. Okay. However, Abba Shol, just like, yes.
The side question.
Let's go quick.
How are they allowed to have a mikvah on the roof? I thought we had a mikvah has to be in the ground. Is it,
that mikvah, if I'm not mistaken, was a mayon, and all of these restrictions you don't have on a mayon.
The mayon got up to the second.
Because the source of the mayon was even higher than that mikvah. Yeah, we learned to Samidus. Let's go weiter. First white line. Abba Shaul says that we're asking about the Lishkas U'etz, that a Lishkas Kohen Gadol Hoysa. That you should know that Lishkas Kohen Gadol Hoysa Chodesh Shteihem. He's not telling you what it was used for. He's just telling you that we're speaking now about the north. That the Lishka of the Kohen Gadol. Now, what we don't know is, that's the key, whether he's speaking about the Parhedrin or the Beis Haftinas. But the Lishka of the Kohen Gadol was behind these two. Hoysa Achere Chodesh Shteihem. However, Vigag, we're speaking about the Goyel and the Gazis, but Vigag Shalashtam Shava. Here on the south side, the roof of the three were all on the same height, unlike the southern Lishka Ois, whose roof were not on the same height. Lishkas HaGoyla, Sham Hayabar HaGoyla, there was what we would call the well that was built l'chayda by the Yidden that lived in the Galus, and the Hagalgonas and all of them. They also had some sort of wheel. They also had some sort of chidush dike way of getting the water out of the well by having less work. There was some sort of pulley system that they created, and all of that was made by the Yidden that lived in the Goyla, and they called that Lishkas HaGoyla. And those waters were important to Misham Hayya Maspik and Maim L'chol Azara. Weiter, Lishkas HaGazis. Why was it called Gazis? Sham Hayya Sanhedrin Shal Yisrael Yosheves. There is where the Sanhedrin sat. So obviously here again, the Lishkas HaGazis was not fully in Kodesh, because you may not sit in the area of Kodesh. It was partially by Kodesh, partially by Choyl. The Sanhedrin obviously sat in the area that was not consecrated b'kedushas hazaram. Why was it called Gazis? Just to know, because as we learned that the stones of the Mizbeach may never be chiseled down with metal. The avonim that the Kohen Gadol wore on his breastplate and on his shoulders may never have even touched metal. The stones that were used in the building of the Beis Hamikdash can have metal used in making them, square, but we may not do that on Har Habayis. So they used to quarry, they would prepare the stones outside the temple area. And then they would bring them in there for the building, but there was a location where they were stored. And that is the Lishkas HaGazis, but that was also used, again, for the Sanhedrin Gedolim. And V'donas HaKohanim, they would judge the Kohanim. Now, not that the only function of the great Sanhedrin was to judge the Kohanim, but we're learning about the temple. So we are appreciating how the Sanhedrin's service was tremendously necessary for the avoid of the Beis Hamikdash, because every Kohen has to determine, two things have to be determined regarding every Kohen. Number one, his pedigree, his lineage. Number two, whether he has any halachically physical blemishes which would make him unqualified for the avodah. And both of these things you have to know halachah. So they would judge him. If a kohen would be found to be unfit, now here we are focusing dafke on the psul of pedigree, because if a kohen has a balmum, then even though he may not do the avodah proper, but we just learned he can deworm the wood. He gets a share of the meat that day. But if he has a psul and pedigree, then he's out. And what showed that he's out of the avodah of the Beis Hamikdash, he would dress in black. It's interesting that Hasidim today dressed in black. Black kapata, black hat. That was a sign. That's a sign that we're not yet working in the Beis Hamikdash. And he would have to leave. And if he was found to be fit, no problem with his pedigree, then dafka he would dress in white. When Mashiach is coming, guys, we're going to always wear a kapata, but it's going to go a bekesha, but it's going to become white. A new business. V'yatza, so v'nivish leipsul, hayalovish levanim, he would dress with white, u'mesatev levanim, v'nichnas u'meshamish u'mechava kohanim. Weiter says, so what did we see over here? We learned from this Mishnah, when the Mishnah was speaking about the northern side, Abba Shaul says that on the northern side there was Lishkas Kohen Gadol. So that's clear. So we know one Lishka was in the north. How do we know there was another Lishka in the south? In other words, the Panhedrin and the Aftinas were not on the same side. We don't yet know which one is where, but first let's establish. Because it says, and another Mishnah in Midas, Shiva Sha'arim Hayib Azara, there were 7 gates in the Azara. Now people who learn Shkalim will jump, they'll say, no, we learned in Shkalim there were 13 gates in the Azara. You're right, but let's not forget that Midas is learned by Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That's going to resolve all these contradictions. And if I'm not mistaken, the Gemara over there in Shkalim mentioned that not everyone subscribes for there being 13 sha'arim in the Beis HaMikdash, and they explained the 13 eshtachavois, remember, was because there were 13 breaches in the Soideg, Va'ayin Sham. But anyways, back over here. So this Tana holds that there were 7 gateways entering into the Azara. 3 were in the north, 3 were in the south, 1 was in the Mizrach. Okay. Says the Mishnah, Shebedarum, let's explain what the names of the gates are. When we're speaking about the south, just to know the Seder, now that Kevin didn't put up the picture, we are going from the western point to the east, just to know how it's working. So the first one, the closest to the west, is Shad Hadlaka, the kindling gate. Second one, from west to east, was Shad HaKarban. The third one was, all this is in the south, the third one was Shad HaMayim. Chavra, that's the whole Shkalim Yud Zayin. If you remember the whole amazing sugya, that when Mashiach will come, aside of it being called Shad HaMayim, we mentioned there because they would bring the water for the avoid of Nisach HaMayim through this gate, aside of that is that this miraculous Mayon that will become into a Bina flowing river that's going to go out and heal the whole world is going to be going out under the threshold of Shad HaMayim. But it was called Shad HaMayim. Now let's go weiter. Sheba Mizrach, the one sha'ar was Shar Niklar. And really, there were 2. That's why I mentioned before when the first Mishnah we learned today spoke about the 6 lishka'os. So we mentioned on ground level, aside of the 2 in the east, 2 lishka'os on the east. One was b'yaminai v'achas b'smoilai. One that was on the right. One of them was called Lishkas Pinchas Albesh. That was one of the 13 offices. His job was to make sure that the big day kahuna should fit the kohanim perfectly. That's a big, very important avodah. One was called Va'achas, was the lishkan which they made the chavitim. Whether it is the minchas chinuch, one time carbon brought by the carbon on his first day, whether it is also the kohen gadol's obligation of bringing every day a chavite kohen gadol. Shebet Safein. Again, we're going now from west to east. Shar Nitzois. And you should know that Shar Nitzois was a binyan achsad rohoya. The gateway was like a pavilion, and the Aliyah b'noi aloy agabov, and on top of it there was a roof. V'sham koyhanim shomrim milmayla uleviyam milmata. When we're going to learn about the Shmira, right? Masechtas Tamid, kohanim guarded from above, the Leviyim stood guard underneath. And behind that, or you entered this area by going through the chel, which everyone says is obvious. I mean, harabayis, soideg, the area between the soideg and the azara proper is called the chel. So they explain that the upper story had an opening to the chel. That's the pshat over here. Second one is called Shar HaKarban. Third one is called Shar Beis HaMoikat. And 1 second, so what's the raya at all that there was a chamber in the south? Says the Gemara, and we learned a brais on this Mishnah, that even though chamesh tevilos, that the kohen gadol needed to go to the mikveh 5 times on Yom Kippur, and that automatically demanded va'asara kiddushin prior and post mikveh. He needed to be mekadosh his hands and his feet. Chevra, we will learn together every step of this in greater detail, but you should know. And let's focus on the tefillos. There was a mikvah that was in the area of Kodesh. And when the Kohen Gadol, indeed, 4 out of the 5 tefillos was done by Kodesh. Where is the Kodesh? Al Gag Beis HaParva, that we learned about. The Gag Beis HaParva, guys, that was the Mishnah we began today with. That's in the south. And that was built in the Makim HaZara. Chutz mizu, aside of the first of the 5. Now, before you began the avodah every day, truth be told, before any Jew entered the area of the temple, we always needed to go to the mikvah. But appreciate that the mikvah that we have to go into prior to going into the temple must be outside the area of the Beis HaMikdash, because we're going to the mikvah to be, so to say, to be able to enter. So the Kohen Gadol is no different than anyone else. So prior, the first one of the 5 has to be where b'choil. Chutz mizu shahoisa al gaba sharamayim. Now sharamayim we learned clearly is in the south. So now we learned that there was a side of the mikveh that we learned about that was on top of the Beis HaParva. Side of that, there was a mikveh that was on top of Sharamayim. Now, all of this south. And now comes the punchline. Ubitzad lishkasoi hoisa. This mikveh in the south was right near the Kohen Gadol's private chamber. So all of a sudden, we learned above that there was a chamber in the north. Now we're learning clearly that there was a chamber in the south, near the mikveh b'choil. What is unclear, and we know that one of them is the Panhedrin, one of them is Lishkas Beis Haftinas. We're trying to put everything together. What is yet unclear by learning the Mishnah is, says the Gemara, V'lo Yodana, right? All this is Rav Papa, right? V'lo Yodana, I Lishkas Panhedrin Batzofin, V'lishkas Beis Haftinas Bedarim, or Punkt Fakert, or Lishkas Beis Haftinas Batzofin, V'lishkas Panhedrin Bedarim. And like Baruch was asking, like all these details, why is it Negea? When a person has a mansion and they love it, they are excited. You ever saw a person building a house? Especially your wife, may she be involved in building a house. She gewaldig, this room is going here, that room is it's personal. But here there's many ethical lessons, as we'll see in a moment. Umestabra, Lishkas Parhedrin was in the Darim. The Lishkas Parhedrin was, now guys, remember, the first tefillah in the mikvah in the morning needed to be Bachoil. Parhedrin was where he slept. Placing the Lishkas Parhedrin Bedarum would mean that the Seder of the day would not demand for the Kohen Gadol to run back and forth, north-south, more than needed. You wake up in the morning, if he slept Hake in the south. He went to the mikveh that was on the side of his chamber, in the south. Now that he's tahar, now we can enter the Makam HaMikdash. Now he would do the training of the Ketairas, of how to do the Chafina in Lishkas Beis Haftinas, which was in the north. Right? So, my Tama, let's go Magdim Koi, he would wake up in the morning. First thing he do was Meisach Hasraglov. Meisach Hasraglov is a Lashon Nekiah for a person to relieve oneself in a bathroom. And the reason why they would call it covering the feet is because they didn't have toilets the way we have today. They would relieve themselves the way it's done still today. In China and certain places in the world, there's a hole in the ground, and you would crouch down, and that would push it. Your physical body would be in a way where you're covering your own feet. But that's a Lashon Nekiah that he would first relieve himself. First, Guf Naki. Then, like we mentioned before anything, he has to go to the mikveh. And we know clearly that this mikveh has to be in the south. Now, if the Parhedrin is in the south, that means Beis Haftinas is in the north, which is good. So now, V'azal Etzafin, and V'gamar Chafina, and V'avid L'Beis HaMikdash, V'avid Avodah Kol Yoma, which is exactly what we learned a few dafim ago, that not only did he have to learn the Chafina, but he needed to practice all of the steps of the Avodah. Furthermore, what did we learn? Remember Machlekes, Rav Meir, Rabbi Yosi, that just in case he was Tommy Mace, they would sprinkle on him the ashes of the red heifer. Let's follow Shitas Rav Meir. Remember that? The problem we had with all that is that Rabbi Akiva says that if someone is tahor and upon them they sprinkle the ashes of the red heifer, it makes them tamei. So you're being machbir, but you're making him tamei. So the solution was, no, you sprinkle on him the ashes at the end of the day. So first he did the avodah. It's mamash, it's following, it's a sikum of everything we learned until now. Ulabahad the panya towards the evening. It has to be before Shkia, because we have to make sure that after the mikvah, it's before Shkia for there to be now head of Shemesh, for him to become tired for the next day. They sprinkle the ashes of the red heifer. Now we learned another detail. Once they sprinkle the ashes, he has to go to the mikvah again. So no problem. Now why does he have to tovel in the darim? Why can't he go to the tefillah in the tzafin? Because if he's tamei, he should not be in the makam hamikdash. He's anyways going back to Darim to go to sleep. It's convenient. You wake up in the morning, go to the mikveh near your home. You do the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. Then when they sprinkle on you the ashes of the red heifer at the end of the day, so you go to the mikveh, the Darim, and v'nayach, and that's it. And you retire in your chambers. It makes his running back and forth the easiest possible, because the Amrat says that Rav Papa, that the Lishkas Parhedrin would have been in the north. Which means he slept in the north. And again, the mikvah that we mentioned, that's b'choil, is in the south. It means that he has to wake up in the morning. Magdim koi. And again, first thing is Meisach Raglov. But now, the first tefillah has to be b'choil. And as we learned in today's daf, that the mikvah that was b'choil was dafka in the south. Mikvah in the north was b'kodesh. The first mikvah has to be in the south. So v'azal adarim. Can you imagine? That means he has to go around. And by the way, you can't walk through the temple complex. He has to walk outside the walls of the Azara. Go to the south, go to the mikvah. V'gamar chafina. And he's going to learn the chafina. Then he goes into the Beis HaMikdash, Yoma. And then again, after they sprinkle the ashes of the Refefer, he's going to have to go back to the south. You understand? And if his living chambers is in the north, he's just going back and forth more than needed. V'tavel in the south, because that's the one that's outside the Makom HaMikdash. And again, he might be Tamei L'Shitas Rabbi Akiva. And then and then he has to go back to the north to his resting chambers. Umeinach. So why will we trouble him that much? It's a lot more convenient for his parhedrin personal sleeping chambers to be in the south near the mikvah. That's anyways b'choil. Gavaldik. Says the Gemara, you are dafka wrong. It's dafka the opposite. Says the Gemara, alam aloi. Why not? Not only why not, but dafka not. Matrachinon leitfei, we make the Kohen Gadol work even harder. Why? Because the Itzaduki, who, as we just learned today in the Mishnah, what were we afraid? That God forbid he subscribed to the Tzedukim, that rejected the emes of the Torah Shebal Peh, the godliness of Torah Shebal Peh. If he would be a Tzeduki, the running back and forth would be so difficult for him, he would give up the whole thing, he wouldn't want to do it. It weeds out people that are not really dedicated, and really dedicated is connected to accepting the divinity of Torah Shebal Peh. The Itzaduki lifresh. Sometimes you find similar by a gate or someone that comes to convert. There is a point, you make it difficult. You don't make it easy. Make it hard for him to do the avodah. Inami, another reason. Even if there's no chashash of a Tzeduki, Kohen Gadol can become arrogant. You make him work, makes him humble. And I'll prove it to you that there were steps that were taken to make it harder. Because if you think that we're not looking deliberately to burden him, why couldn't they have both of these chambers, his sleeping chambers and his work chamber, parhedrin, aftinas, why were they not on the same side? You know, even if you're going to put the parhedrin in the south, you can still make it even easier. How can you make it even easier? He sleeps in the south, he goes to the mikvah in the south, he works in the south, he goes to sleep in the south. Or more. Why do you have to have two chambers? Why do you need to have two chambers? Tizkilei b'chad, just to make life easier. Chassidish question. Balabas will say, what are you talking about? I don't want to work in my home, I want to go out. No, the Rebbe said...
Because we needed one that was outside and one that was inside. No?
We need it because both of them could have been outside. No, it's why would we care, Danny, if the Lishkas Aftinas was Bachoil? What would be the end of the world? Who cares? Sleeping Bachoil, going to the mikvah Bachoil. I mean, he's right there, he's in the complex. When he's going during the day in the Beis HaMikdash to do the avodah, he's going inside there. But I'm saying keep everything together. I'm saying after the Rebbetzin passed away, the Rebbe lived in his office. For the Rebbe was less time wasted, Ke'ilu. You're living in one place, you're not going anywhere. And the answer is no, they deliberately added, so to say, unnecessary burdens. So the Gemara is actually concluding Dafka, you know where the Parhedrin was? The Parhedrin was in the north. For him to have to go back and forth to weed out the Tzedukim and to keep the Kohen Gadol humbler, today we would say to give him schar alicha. Okay, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara of Amrullah, and they would tell the Kohen Gadol, Ishi, my master Kohen Gadol, that you are our shliach. Says the Gemara, this is a problem. Leima to have it to Yufta. Does this not refute Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yeshua? The Amar Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yeshua. Kahanim they must be viewed as shluchim of God Almighty. They must be viewed, and the nafkamino, who cares who are they representing? So Rashi reminds us what we have in the Darim, that if a person makes a vow not to have hana from kohanim, if kohanim are my representatives, then a kohen cannot do the avodah for me, which is a terrible thing. If kohanim are shluchei derachmana, even if I made a vow that all of the kohanim are usher upon me, I can bring a korban to the Beis HaMikdash. He's not doing it for me, he's doing it for God. And Rabbi Yeshua holds, Rav Huna ben Yeshua holds, he's taka shluchei derachmana. And how does he prove it? Because the Amrat says, Rav Huna, that shluchei didan ninu, if they are our shluchim daf yutes amid beis, mi ikemide, the anan lemitzin lemevet. A Yisrael may not do the avodah. I cannot do the avodah. Even a Levi cannot do the avodah. So how can you have a kohen doing it for you? Do you find anything that the mishaleach is not allowed to do it, but a shliach could? V'shluchei didan matzei avdei. That's his raya, that kohanim are shluchei derachmana. The problem is that the lashon of the shvuah, or the intro to the oath, seems to imply that you are our shluchim. It goes against Rav Huna. Answers the Gemara, no, it doesn't. They're not focusing at all on who are you representing. But whenever you adjure someone, whenever you tell someone to take an oath, then their intent is extremely important. By shvuahs, by nedarim, peh v'leiv have to be shaven. So therefore, what are we afraid of? We're choyesh that he's a tzeduki. Now, even tzedukim, they didn't want to take an oath in vain. But maybe the way that tzeduki would get out of it is by repeating the words, but by having a different intention. So what you do is to circumvent that, you tell the person, I'm making you swear, but the meaning of the oath should not be the way you want to give meaning into the words. It should be the way we are giving meaning to the words. Right, you're being mashbiya someone al das bezdin. That's the whole concept, and let's go on. Mashbiyan anu alecha al dateinu al das bezdin. But who are you actually representing? Zolzain, you're representing Rachmanam. Now, after the oath was given, who paidish vaycha? The Kohen Gadol turns aside and he cries. Vehein parishim abaychem v'chulei. Says the Gemara, why was he paidish abaycha shechashadush tzeduki? It's very hurtful that they suspected this Kohen Gadol to be a tzeduki. Vehein parishim b'varchem. Why do they turn aside and cry? Damar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. As we learn in Chitas, that when Moshe Rabbeinu says Veheim lo yaminu li, that maybe the Yidden won't believe. And what happened? One of the three signs that God gave him was that he put his hand inside his garments, and his Moshe Rabbeinu's hand became filled with tzaras. Now, why was that given as a sign? Because he was choshed b'chshedim. So there's a penalty on it. He's stricken on his body. So they cry, but they have to do this. What was the issue? What was the area in which the tzedukim differed from the emes that we were concerned about, as we spoke about in the introduction? We don't want the Kohen Gadol to prepare the ketaitis, the incense, to put it on the coals prior to entering the kodesh kachim, and only then entering. We don't want him to do that. When that's the way. And let's go with the story. That he took an oath, a false oath. He was out to do the avodah kederach that the tzedukim are us. And no one knew about it until after the fact. Because don't forget, no one is in there at all. No one is in the heichal. The only one there is the Kohen Gadol. He was very happy. He did it. He got away with it. He showed everyone. Pagabayaviv, his father met him. And Amar Loi, his father understood from the joy of his son, the father was a tzeduki, the son was a tzeduki, that he deviated from what Hashem wanted. He says, Bini, afa pishet tzedukimanu. In other words, we interpret the pasuk that we'll learn in a moment, Ki be'onon eira elakapayres, we interpret it the way we want to interpret it. But nevertheless, the father tells the son, Misyarim anu min haperushim. We have to act the way that Perushim means the Yidden, we are the Perushim. We are the ones that separate ourselves from the Tzedukim. We are connected to God. No, you shouldn't have acted the way we say them. It's the father himself said that, this is theoretical, but Poyel Mamish, you should have done it the way we always did it. So Amar Loi, so the son, no. He says, Kol Yoma Yehoyisim Etzdai Al Mikra. My whole life, I was always anguished when I read the pasuk in Achri Mos where it says, Ki be'anan, that with the cloud I will appear on the kapoides. And they understood that only if you put the ketaitis on the burning coals outside the kodesh kachim, only if you enter already in a cloud will God appear, or will then God appear in the cloud on top of the kapoides. And whenever I read that pasuk and I interpreted the tzeduki erroneously, Marte, I would say, this is Zelu Umazetu Rabakiva, Masa Yaviv Liyadi V'akaimenu. But Achshav Shabal Yadan, or Liyadi, now that finally I was given the opportunity to do it wrong, I'm not going to do it wrong. I'm not going to do it the way the Tzedukim say. So he challenged his father. He did it and he was happy. No tshuva. So Amru, we have a tradition, that it was only a few days later when he passed away, and not only did he pass away, but the circumstances are not written. But he didn't have a kvuras Yisrael. He was v'hutal bahashpa. His body was thrown on a garbage dump. People saw how worms are leaving his nose. Rashi says that the first part of his body that entered the Kodesh Kachim, Shaloi Kedin, because the whole entry was against God's will. He was doing the avodah wrong. When you walk, the first part of you that goes into the new environment is your nose. So the nose was punished over here first. Bachlal Mikan, that it wasn't the way people think, that if the Kohen Gadol is unworthy, he died in the Kodesh Kachim. He died shortly afterwards. We're going to learn later that the Taka would tie a string around him just in case he would pass away, not to have to go in there to retrieve his body. But even in this case, he passed away a few days later. The Yeshoimim, other people say, no, he passed away much sooner. That B'yitziyasai, when he went out of the Kodesh Kachim, before he left the Heichel. So this happened the moment he walked out, Nigaf, he was smitten. What happened? The Tani Rabchia. Kemin koil nishma ba'azara. Something like a sound, interesting expression, was heard in the Azara, which is where the other Kahanim are standing. What was the sound that they heard, or kemin sound? Shaba malach, a malach came. V'chavata yalpanav, and the malach zets this guy on his face. And when they heard a sound, he collapsed there. It means he passed away in the Heichel. They went into the Kodesh. And what did they find? The Motzoi kekaf regel bein kesefam. They looked like the imprint. Now, I know that egel means a calf, but it doesn't mean a calf. It means, as we're going to quote a pasuk soon, that the malachim, so to say, have one leg. And the bottom of their leg is rounded. So there was the imprint of something that looks like a round leg. Here it says in between his shoulders. In the Yerushalmi it says on his metzach, on his forehead. As it says in Yecheskel V'Ragleim that the feet of the malachim are regel yeshara, which is, by the way, why we stand with our feet together when we say Shmona Esrei and Kedusha. V'chaf Ragleim, this is a pasuk, kechaf regel egel, a rounded foot. In other words, the moment he left, he got a knack. And he passed away in the Heichel. Let's go weiter. Amar Rabbi Chai ben Kevutal v'chulei. No, you can read to the Kohen Gadol, to the Amoritz, anything. You can read to Neil also. It doesn't have to be the ones that the Mishnah mentioned. So Masni lei Rav Chanan bar Rav Elechia bar Rav Kamei de Rav. We have this so many times already. In other words, Rav hired the Malamed to teach his son. And many times the father, the great Rav, sat in by the lesson. Rav was doing his own things, but Rav wanted to hear what they're teaching his son. So when the teacher, Rav Chanan bar Rava, was teaching Chia, the son of Rav, and when he was reading this Mishnah, Omar, he says that Rab Zachariah ben Kevutal, his girsa was not a vase, but a pei. And listen, it's that important. So Rav was upset. He says, no, you have it wrong. But Rav couldn't speak. We'll see why. So Rav motioned with his hand, Umach v'lei Rav biyadein. He motioned with his hand that it's not a pei, or a fei, it's a vase or a base. Kevutal. So how did he make that motion? Well, use your own imagination. Just to know, laha'ir, that in the real writing of a pei, in a Sefer Torah, the white parchment, the white fire, around the black fire, you know what you would see inside every pei? A base. I wish I can show it to you. If you would look at a Ksav Ashuri pei, inside of it, the white is not a chaf, it's a base. So it's interesting that these two letters do interchange, and really pei is a mouth, beis is bereishis bara, that's connected to the hemshech, Ula Yeshleimer. We're going to speak about the importance of only using the peh to say divrei Torah. But are you looking at the mouth, let's say at the keli, or are you looking at the oir, at the light? Anyways, Rav motioned, make a beis. He made a motion with his hands. So the Gemara wants to understand, why did he have to correct the Malamed by motioning with his hands? Why didn't he tell him? Don't say kefutal, say kevutal. V'neimelei meimar zogas beferish. Why motion? Because that happened while he was reading the Shema. Hold on, if he was reading the Shema, why was he even allowed to make a hand motion? V'chi agavna misharei. Right? While you're reading the Shema, don't make a signal with your eyes. Don't mouth word silently. You can't talk, but you're making mad. Don't move your lips. Don't make gestures with your fingers. You're standing in front of God. You're saying the Shema. Furthermore, V'tanya we learned in the Braisa. Rabbi Lazar Chisma says, Hakodesh Shema. And he does do that. Umaramas be'inav, or umekaretz b'sifsoifsav, or umara be'etzboi, Allah v'akosov oimer, v'lo yoisi korasa Yaakov, you did not call out to me. Not pshat that you called out to other gods. No, that when you're talking to me, and while you're talking to me, you're making motions to someone else, then you're not calling out to me at all. Answers the Gemara, like kasha. Guys, we learned this in Brachos. When are we not even allowed to make any sort of bodily gesture? That's only while we are reading Perek Rishon. Perek Rishon means Shema v'yahavta. The story in Rav, and Rav corrected the Malamed. He was reading Perek Sheni. V'ayim Shemayam. Now that we spoke about the Shema, some more Agadata Ton Rabbanan. We learned in a Braisa when it says in the Shema, Vidibarta Bam. Now literally it means speak the words of Shema. So let's begin with the literal. Bam, speech is Shema, but not in Tefilla. Tefilla should not be spoken. What does it mean Tefilla should not be spoken? Explains Rashi. Shema should be said loud. Dibur means that other people hear. Tefilla has to be balachash. Look inside the Rashi and you will see that it's mashma, that how silent should tefillah be, that even you should not hear it. Words should leave your mouth, but they should b'chlal not be heard. And that's what he quotes over there from Chana. V'koilo lo yishama. And that's what he found from the Sheiltis, which is a big topic. Anyways, we don't paskin that way. We hold that when you daven Shemona Esrei, you yourself should hear the words that you're saying. But where do we have this differentiation between Shema and Shemona Esrei? Here, Bam, Dibur, Shema, loud, Shemona Esrei, silent. Next, V'dibarta Bam. Now from here on, the Braisa is broadening the understanding of V'dibarta Bam. It's not only about the Shema. It's about David, Torah, B'chlal, Torah, Tefillah. V'dibarta Bam, Yesh l'chol reshus l'daber. Torah matters should be spoken. But you b'chlal don't have permission from God to use your mouth to speak idle gossip, idle words. Rashi writes, to speak frivolous words. Rab Acha Omer. More, v'dibarta bam means asay oisum kavah. Dibur is stark. Torah should be made permanent. A fixture, and this is a fixture in time, and as we have in the Hayom Yom, even you see inside, even more than the fixture in time, that says the Rebbe is a fixture in your soul. It has to be kavua. And va'al tasem arei. Don't make Torah as some sort of temporary occupation. Omarava hasach sichas chulin. Guys, this is agadata. In other words, we're not learning halacha. But look at his words. Whoever b'chlal, anyone who engages in any trivial conversation is violating a positive commandment. As it says, v'dibarta bam. Bam v'lo b'dvarim acherim. Rav Acha bar Yaakov says more. Not only are you violating a positive commandment, you are violating a negative commandment. Now, he's not quoting, it's not a lav, you're not going to get malchus, he's quoting a pasuk from Koheles. So what? We're learning Agadata. We learn in Koheles. Kol hadvarim yigeim. All wearying words. You know what that means? Any words that are not divrei Torah, they ultimately wear you down. The only words that give you life are words of Torah. So by default, the Dvarim Yigeim is, you know how we view words that are not Torah Tefillah, or words of mitzvahs, lo yuchal ish l'daber, no one should even engage in. Okay, let's go on to the Mishnah. So as it's interesting that in the Mishnah that we started today on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, the Mishnah began with his 7 days preparation, focusing on the Chafina and on the oath, whether the oath was all 7 days, whether it was only Erev Yom Kippur, be that as it may. And then the same Mishnah went into the night already, the night of, that he would teach or he would listen or they would read in front of him. And now we are continuing the night of. Now, stay up the whole night. So what happens, says the Mishnah, Bikesh lehisnamneim. Nebuch is chalashing to doze off. So what do you do to a person that's dozing off? So they had what we call the pirchei kahuna, the young kohanim. So what did they do was makin lefanav be'etzbat tzirada. They would bang in front of him with their tzirada finger, and as we'll see, they would snap. They began to snap. They began to make noise, and they sung. We'll see soon what they did. They began to make a tumult for him not to fall asleep. And And on top of that, they told him, Ishi Kohen Gadol, my master Kohen Gadol, Amoid, stand up. Shavuos night, that's the minig. If someone falls asleep, the teacher should tell him, stand up. And v'hafek achas ala ritzba, and perform a feat. We'll see soon, some sort of unique feat on the ground, which will wake you up. So B'chlal walking around on the cold ground, when you're cold, you wake up. They say that the Marsha, who learned day and night, so at night when he got very tired, he had near him a bowl of cold water, and if he would get very tired, he would put his feet in the cold water. That's the same kind, just to keep himself awake. And says the Mishnah, they kept him occupied until the time of the slaughtering of the Talmud Shol Shachar came. All of that is in order for him not to fall asleep, and the whole fear of falling asleep is because he might have a seminal emission. Okay, says the Gemara. First of all, they would mock in the fun of the etzbat tzirada. What my tzirada? Amar Rav Yehuda tzarasadida. Tzirada means the rival finger. What's the rival finger? So there's so many ways of learning the Gemara, but let's just read the words. Mai goidel or gudel, the thumb. Now, there are two fingers that are trying to grab the attention of the thumb. The two closest finger to the thumb, the index finger and the middle finger. So let's go with the pshat that they would use the middle finger, that's the rival, that's the tzara of the index finger, was used to make noise, because indeed, if you look right now, when you want to snap your fingers, it's a lot easier to make a sound with your middle finger than with your index finger. Other people learn mamash the opposite. And when we learned it last time, there was a Persian over here that showed us how to make up a big sound with the index finger. So all of this comes from the Beis HaMikdash. And Machvi Rav Huna. Rav Huna made a demonstration. Now I'm making it with my middle finger because that's all I know how to do. Rav Huna knew how to make the sound, and you should know v'azal kala b'kula beis Rav. The ganze Beis HaMedrash was boomed. They heard the noise of the demonstration of Rav Huna. 1 second. Says the Gemara. Let's hop another line. And v'oimrim loy. And they would tell the Kohen Gadol, Ishi, my master Kohen Gadol. If that didn't work, hafek achas ala ritzpa. Demonstrate, do something on the ritzpa, on the floor. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, ol chadas, show us something special. Maihi, what did they ask him to do? So Amalei, we're going to stop here. Achavei kida. They asked him to perform a kida. Now a kida is a form of bowing in which you are standing on the ground, you are bending over only by your waist, and you're going all the way down to the point that one is able to kiss the floor of the Holy Azara only by leaning on the thumbs. And that's a feat that takes a lot of concentration. So they asked him to perform a kida. All of that was for him to keep himself awake, and many more details, God willing, to come in the next year, to be continued.